on that day, I still remember I met her father out in the barn, and he was working on a piece of equipment, a tractor. And I said, "Hey, do you have a second?" And he said, "Sure. What's going on?" And the way I recall it, because I was probably a little bit, I had some trauma from this event. Maybe it's PTSD, I don't know. But over the years, I remember having that conversation and saying, "Sir, I'd like to ask for your permission to marry your daughter." And he turned around and said, "Can you go over to the fridge?" He had a fridge out in the barn there, and get a couple beers. And so I did. And we sat on the tractor tire and we had a beer. And he said, "I was right about you." And I said, "Oh, what was that?" And he said, "You quite possibly might be the dumbest son of a bitch I ever met." That's not a good start.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Ron Cox. Ron is a seasoned executive, entrepreneur, and leadership coach who has spent nearly 40 years helping organizations grow, adapt, and win. As CEO of RC Development Solutions, he works with leaders and teams to turn big vision into real-world results. He is the author of 2 books, Unbroken, From Bullied to Boardroom, and Me and My Best Friend, 30 Stories Over 30 Years. You can learn more about Ron at rcdevsolutions.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Ron.
Ron, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you. We met through Brent Fuller, who I worked with at Sprint PCS before it was part of Sprint, now T-Mobile. But yeah, very excited. We met, we had beers with Brent and a friend of Brent and mine, Jerry Kaufman. So that was nice. So I know a lot of your journey, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things. You've had an amazing career and life and things you've had to overcome, you know, from an abusive childhood to all your medical issues. But let's start with a fun question, though. Even people know you fairly well, Ron, and your book, Unbroken, really reveal just about everything in your life. What thing would surprise them about you?
I think the fact that just coming from this small town, having spent some time, growing with the town, the community, the family, I think most people would say today, they can't believe where you've come from, and you touched on it briefly, but just my experiences from broken family to state of Kansas, dealing with foster care and just growing. A lot of people would say, "You did what?"
A lot of people's childhood could be very traumatic in many ways. Like if I just look at all the things that like kind of happened to you before or right around from birth till 18, you're abused by your stepfather. You had a gun pointed at your head when you were 10 or 11 years old, when you're riding at night, trying to get home because you had a heart, you were working and doing things. You were almost raped by a pedophile of the uncle of a supposedly friend. Yeah. You had a suicide attempt. You had death of a close friend. Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So I mean, I know we're going to touch on that, but I mean, like most kids have some fun. So what was fun for you growing up? What did you love doing, even in that type of environment?
I think the most fun that I had was early on getting involved with small youth organizations, playing sports, probably like you and your friends did, trying to figure out, where our passion was and being able to get out there and just kind of meet people. And a lot of kids, back in the day without technology, we would just gather in a corner and, go to a local park and play baseball or catch or whatever it was. So I think that was probably, getting introduced to meeting other people and developing some friendships.
Yeah, and probably too, sports was a way to, have bonding and, learn teamwork and escape kind of what your home life was like, I'm sure. Did you have any aspirations? Would be a NFL football player, a Major League Baseball player? What was it for you? Like you're 12 years old. What am I going to be when I grow up type thing?
I was on a pathway. Really, I had two things that were really, I think, driving me as far as what I want to be when I grow up. So if you're in elementary school and you have that question posed by a teacher, what are you going to do when you grow up? Back, growing up in the 70s, there was a lot of different, I guess, draws, if you will, a lot of different avenues you could go to. But for me, and being with my grandparents, I was going to play football. I was going to go be an NFL, star, make all this money and just, claim to fame. Or the very opposite of that was my grandfather would always plant in my ear service minded. So military, following in his path back in the 40s when he was similar my age, he was, thrust into World War II. And so I was passionate about his stories and what he did, for our country. So it was going to be, I'm going to play in the NFL or I'm going to go, be a fighter pilot. Those were my two missions.
There you go. I feel the need for speed.
That's right.
Yeah, I was delusional. I thought I would be an NFL quarterback, but after a less than stellar high school career, I knew that was not going to happen.
You just struck something with me, which was kind of funny, that mentality too, because I like you, I played football and, quarterbacks are the star players and they get all the girls and the headlines and all the fun stuff. And I had this conversation, it was like, when I was playing in high school, I had the opportunity, small school, so you play both sides, offense and defense. And I played, ironically, I was number 14 and I played linebacker and I played quarterback.
Wow.
And so I thought, what the most fun is being able to hit people in the field, not getting hit,
Right.
And so my mentality switched to, hey, I'd rather hunt than be hunted. And so, So I was going to go to the NFL, but I think I was going to be the defender.
Was 14, trying to think any pro stars that were number 14, what was the significance, if any?
Actually, I didn't try to model after a specific player. Just that was, stand in line, grab it out of the box when it's your turn. Right. And the volunteer coach in youth football gave it to me. And when I got to high school, I was like, okay, I'm 14. Ironically enough, when my wife and I had a son, my wife goes, what's his number going to be on soccer? And he was 14.
Oh, interesting. Love that. And where did you grow up, Ron?
I grew up down just really a suburb of Wichita, Kansas, in southern Kansas. So in southeast side is a little town called Winfield. So it's probably 14,000 people.
Yeah. They have the big, the third weekend in September, they have the big Bluegrass, Walnut Creek Music Festival every year.
That's the highest population that we have probably all year is during that event. It's been there for decades, and a lot of musicians come in. And so, I actually could hear it from my backyard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How funny. I don't know how much you want to get into your childhood because, I mentioned some things and I left out a big, you were just so distraught from everything that happened to you during your childhood, you attempted suicide. Talk a little bit about that and, how that formed who you are today.
We touched on it briefly, but I didn't have the best childhood. And so I had a lot of, misguided people around me. And so I think the people I was hanging out with weren't the best, and the influence that they were having on me was not the best. And so my mother had not made a good decision in her relationship. And so I was abused by my stepfather mentally, physically for a number of years. And so finally, it just came to a head one day and he hit me. And my neighbor, who happened to be looking out the window, saw it probably the first time. It probably saved my life and changed the outcome for me. But I was taken to the emergency room and I was treated there, and he was taken away by the local law enforcement. And from that day forward, we were pretty much separated and going through the system, trying to figure out protective orders and how I was going to be taken care of, because being a minor, they took me away and I was going to be thrust into the family courts system, which always ends up with you're with a relative or you're in some sort of foster care program. And for me, thank goodness I got in the short lane and I got into the family. And so of all people, my mother, who I didn't feel like had taken good care of me and protected me for a number of years, her folks ended up adopting me or got parental rights for me. And so they could enroll me in school and things. And so that kind of got me back on the right track, if you will, but in that small town. And, from some of the previous relationships I've had and that I had created, it was not going well. And so for me, it just seemed like it just compounded and compounded and compounded. My grandparents, being able to help me start over, get a new foundation, encouraged me in a new neighborhood with new people and new friendships. And so that really helped me move forward. But in school, I was very depressed. I think I just had a lot of that baggage as a young adult. I got into alcohol. And so by sixth grade, I'd had my first blackout experience with related to alcohol. It's not a good thing when you wake up and you're sitting there tied up in a chair and you're thinking, what is going on? How did I end up here? And lo and behold, the story goes, it was for my own protection, just because it was my cousin who had done that to me to help take care of me so that I would stay inside and that I would not get outside where I could get hurt or hurt others. And so from that day forward, just trying to figure out who I wanted to be, who I was going to associate with, and just trying to surround myself with good people. And I was blessed in the fact that I was able to find some good people. And next thing you know, high school was a great experience for me. I got through high school. I was ready to go to college, trying to figure out what I wanted to be. One of the things I learned, and I don't think you and I talked about this, but it is kind of interesting thinking back now. My grandfather, I was sitting out on the patio one day and I thought, I've got a big decision to make. And my big decision was sports related. I played baseball with some of my best friends. I surrounded myself with good guys and we had a lot of fun. And then all of a sudden I get recruited to play on a traveling team in a competitive environment where you would get noticed and you would have opportunities to have college paid for and things like that. And so I was sitting out there trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And my grandfather said, why are you so upset? You've been sitting here for a couple hours now. What's bothering you? And I told him, I said, I got a decision and I have to figure it out by this weekend. And he said, you think that's a hard decision? And I said, absolutely. I don't want to disappoint anyone. I want to make sure that I continue to grow and mature and I'm around the right people. And he said, until you get thrust into making a decision, literally, that you have to decide who lives and who dies, he goes, that's a tough decision. Those are the kind of things that keep you up at night. And then after you act on that, those are the kind of things that stick with you the rest of your life. He goes, that's a hard decision. When I was sitting on an island in Pearl Harbor, the day that the Japanese soldiers decided to bring America into the war, all of a sudden I'm thrust into a battlefield, no more practice, no more training, it's live. And in those battlefields and those opportunities presenting themselves, I get to decide who's going to live and who's going to die. And I have to make those decisions based on my commitment to my team and the training that I went through. And those are tough decisions. So if I were you, and he literally said, go in there and grab yourself one of those cans of Coke, come back out here and let's finish this conversation. And to this day, as a 17-year-old, I'm sitting there going, I still think this isn't a life or death decision. It really isn't. And just process it, know the facts and move on and you'll be okay. And so that was a decision and a process that I went through with my grandfather. And that's a hard decision.
Two things about that. Which did you pick? Is the first one.
I bounced it off my grandmother and I went with the traveling baseball team. I went to that team and we ended up having a great time, and I made new friends.
Right.
And my old friends, I found out were real friends because they didn't, stop talking to me because we didn't play ball together. And so
Right.
some of them are still my friends today, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I love that.
My grandmother
Yeah.
refers to it. She said, "You know what I call that?" I said, "What's that, Grandma?" And she said, "That's a business decision. You can't afford to pay for college."
Right. There you go. Yeah. Early on in my leadership career, I worked at Sprint when it was a startup. And I used to tell my team, because it was stressful at times. We had a lot of type A personalities. It moved very fast. And I used to say, look, we're not saving lives here. So it's okay. And actually one of the first books I gifted my team in my whole career was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So if you're familiar with that story, he was a Holocaust. He was a psychiatrist. He was in the Nazi concentration camp, Auschwitz, I believe. Watched his whole family get killed in front of him. And the book is about basically you can control your mind and how you react to things. And he would never let the Nazis have, his character and his thoughts, and he was helping his fellow prisoners, survive. I said, this is life, what we're doing here is not, like I said, we think it's important, but it's not as important as we think. What was your college making decision when we left high school? What was your thought process there?
I was going to go to Emporia State, and Emporia State, small college in Kansas, close to home. A lot of high school friends were going there. When I went there, I had the opportunity. They back in the day, you actually had the opportunity. You could do more than one sport, believe it or not. You could play whatever's in season. So when I showed up there late summer of 1987, I ended up on the football team, and then I also ended up on the track team. Those passions for me in sports and just helping pay the bills and pay for college didn't last long, though, because I met a lady. And that's something you and I talked a little bit about. And I met a young lady, and I was 18 years old, freshman year. Met her just right at the end of first semester. And we decided, and it was like love at first sight for us. And from the first date, first time I met her moving forward, we were inseparable. We actually transferred colleges, and we went to Pittsburgh State, and there went the end of the playing for scholarship and playing football or track to help pay for school. It went more focused on getting my degree, getting my education in the area that I was passionate about, because my wife said, and my grandmother said, well, you're here in school to get a degree and get an education so that you can have a career and a family. And so my mind shifted to focusing on school. And fortunately, at the time, Pittsburgh had a better degree program aligned with what I wanted to do, and also met with my girlfriend at the time, what she wanted to do. And so we relocated and moved to Pittsburgh State, and then so started focusing on education.
Yeah, and you ended up marrying her, and now it's been how many years?
Oh goodness,
We've
been together right now. We do 36 years.
36 years. Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
And by the way, for our listening audience, we're recording on St. Patty's Day, and tomorrow is Ron's birthday. So happy birthday, Ron!
Thank you.
There you go. So what did you major in Pittsburgh State? What was your thought process behind the major?
Well, we went to Pittsburgh State because I was passionate about construction management, construction science, developing. I'd spent time, through internships, going and working for architectural firms. I spent a little bit of time at Kansas Department of Transportation. So I knew the infrastructure side, from building, highway infrastructure, building sidewalks, curbs, stormwater, all of that stuff. And so I was going to go and be a developer, and I was going to go in and get a degree and figure out, where I was going to develop and what I was going to build. And my wife at the time, she was in a business school. And so she was going to be, get a degree in business. I was going to get a degree in construction management. When we got down there, we were thinking, all right, this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to go. And absolutely did not fall in love with the community and the school, and not having any friends in anywhere there that we grew up with, and, mostly surround ourselves with a bunch of new people and strangers. It just wasn't a good fit for us on the community side. And so the following year, we actually go back to Emporia State. And we went back there because it's close to her home and her mom and her dad, and it's close to my grandparents. And so we went back there and settled in, and we got married. One of the reasons we got married is kind of interesting. We were going to get a place together, and being raised by my grandparents, my grandmother said, "What is your intentions with this young lady? Because I didn't raise you to live in sin." And so my grandmother and I had a long conversation about what are my intentions. And my intentions were, I thought for sure this was the love of my life, and this was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And so she said, I don't want you buying a place. I don't want you and your wife or girlfriend at the time, Raquel, spending any of that time doing this, wasting that. She goes, you need to bring this young lady, and I need to meet her. And so we had a conversation. She met my grandmother and her really hit it off, which was very nice for me. And then I decided, I need to do the right thing. And so we traveled past Emporia State back to her farm, being with parents. One's a school teacher and one's a farmer. And so very conservative. And so I went out on that day. I still remember I met her father out in the barn, and he was working on a piece of equipment, a tractor. And I said, "Hey, do you have a second?" And he said, "Sure. What's going on?" And the way I recall it, because I was probably a little bit, I had some trauma from this event. Maybe it's PTSD. I don't know. But over the years, I remember having that conversation and saying, "Sir, I'd like to ask for your permission to marry your daughter." And he turned around and said, "Can you go over to the fridge?" He had a fridge out in the barn there, and get a couple beers. And so I did. And we sat on the tractor tire and we had a beer. And he said, "I was right about you." And I said, "Oh, what was that?" And he said, "You quite possibly might be the dumbest son of a bitch I ever met." And I thought, that's not a good start. And I thought, don't get argumentative. Don't let your pride get in the way. Just hear this gentleman out. And so I said, "I don't understand. Is that a yes or a no? Or is there something I've said or something I've done or my action, not aligned with what your values?" And he said, "Her mother and I raised a strong, independent woman. Do you really think it matters what the hell I say and how I answer that question? Jesus Christ, it's supposed to rain tomorrow, and I've got 40 acres of beans I've got to get cut. So if you don't mind, can I get back to getting this thing fixed so I can get back out in the field?" And I said, "I appreciate your time, sir." And so I went back to the house, and I got Raquel, and I just said, "Hey, we need to go." And she said, "Was my father rude? Did something happen?" And I said, "Nope, I'm not coming between you and your father. That's for sure." So we drove back to Emporia State. And on the way there, we took a little U-turn to a little mall. And I didn't have a lot of money back then. And so I think the way it ends is I buy this thing called a promise ring back in the day. I think today you go straight to an engagement ring. But I bought a promise ring, and I had like $80. So I said, "Would you marry me?" And she said, "Is this what you're giving me?" And I said, "Yes, I'm asking for your hand in marriage, and this is all the money I have." And so if my intentions are pure, we're going to move in together. My grandmother, has given me the blessing. Your father, I think, gave me the blessing. As long as you're okay with it, it's your decision. So she accepted, and we were back in Emporia. And my grandmother, I called her and I said, can we sign a contract together now on this place so we can move in together and make it, more permanent? And she said, "I need to talk to Raquel, because from now on, you don't get to make any decisions." That's right. And so away we went, and we've been together ever since. So
wow.
I was 18 and she was 19 years old.
Wow. It's a great story. Great story. So what happens after Emporia State? Like, what was your first job? How'd you get it?
I actually, when I left Emporia State, Raquel and I moved to Kansas City. So we were in a little tiny southeast suburb of Kansas City, Lee's Summit. And in Lee Summit, Raquel went straight into business office. She worked for a large furniture company and worked in billing and processing. Just what she wanted to do is run the office. And I took a job with MoDOT. So I went straight back into the construction side after getting my degree in finance and business. And one of the nice things there is I got to get right into the throes of, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of capital improvement programs. And once again, it went straight back into highways, bridges, infrastructure. And I was construction managing a large infrastructure for MoDOT. And right after that, I decided to apply for, and I took a job at the city of Lee Summit, our hometown. And I went into that, into the construction side, public works side. So I did project management for the city, at the time as the fastest growing municipality in the state. And I was thrust into everything from project management to land acquisition. So I got to go way back upstream, if you will, in the planning process and decide, what infrastructure needs the community would have as it continued to grow. And I learned a lot during that process about the value of property. I went and got certified in land acquisition. I went and got certified in appraisal so I could determine what the value of a property was. I went to the FAA, took classes and got trained on airport development. So my father-in-law made fun of me, but he said, "You're buying airspace?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm buying airspace from farmers like you, because apparently it has a negative impact on livestock, crops, houses, quality of life." And so he was like, "I never thought you would ever have a degree or certification and background in navigational easements and land acquisition." And I said, "Me neither." But being a young professional, it was probably one of the best things I ever did, because it's personal and it's professional. So, as I went through that process, I learned a lot about, the ground up construction. And through that, I transitioned over through and started working with a friend of mine at Lee Summit Public Schools. And the reason I went over there is he kind of challenged me in a way. We had a conversation about acquisition, and the school district was struggling at the time, not academically. They were one of the top performing school districts, but they were struggling with keeping up on infrastructure. And so we were going to the community saying, how can we help? And as a parent, Raquel and I had 2 children in the district ourselves. We knew that it was inadequate. We were tired of our children, being educated in trailers. They literally had mobile trailers on playgrounds. And that's not the kind of setting and environment we thought was best for education. And so I went over as a procurement professional and I worked with him. We did, we brought community together and we started doing, public conversations out loud about what are some of the struggles to the district, what's keeping us from being the best district in America, infrastructure, facilities. We had great teachers, great staff. Our test scores were off the chart. And so we wanted to figure out how we could sustain that. And so we ended up doing bond issues and doing construction and acquiring real estate, imagine that, property, and building buildings. And so we got to where we were doing an elementary school probably about every 18 months. We got to a middle school. We did a third high school. We renovated the other high school. And during this process, doing procurement and growing, I was contacted by another friend and said, we would really like to go into business together, be partners, have you come over and help us out. And that's when you and I had that conversation about how'd you meet the Kincaid family?
Right.
And that was through those conversations. And so for the first time, I went from the government side, the not-for-profit side, just specifically construction development, into a COO role, into the operations side of a company. The father was transitioning out. Younger generation was coming in. The fail rate's really high for, first to second generation transitions in companies. And so, I knew the son and I knew mom and dad, and kind of I was the triangle, if you will, in the middle of that. And with my operation and business experience, it was, help us ensure success for our family moving forward. And so we negotiated a contract. So I would go over and, work as the COO. The son was a president, CEO. Dad had taken an honorary title as founder, still engaged, more as a board type member, if you will. That was 2017. Going through that 2017 transition into a family-owned business was pretty shocking for me because I hadn't done that. I still remember asking at the first board meeting, I'm a financial guy. I need my financing. I need all those numbers. We make, data-driven decisions. It's kind of who we are. It's what my education taught me. It's what my professional training taught me, and wasn't getting the numbers. And finally, I just had a rough conversation about we need to make a change in the financial side and the CFO side. So we did. We had a person who came in, did the numbers for us, very, very good CFO. And we were very fortunate in the fact that his wife and him were in a spot in their life where they were transitioning. He was coming from California, ran his own company where he was the financial guru. He did a lot of 1099 work for large organizations where he contracted and came in and did their books. So he was doing a 1099 part-time, trying to figure out what he was going to do in Kansas City, retire, work, be here for the grandkids. And so I asked him if he would come in and be the CFO. And he said, I'm not going to work 70, 80 hours a week again. So I said, well, let's figure that out. What does that look like? And I said, if you're that good, you won't have to.
Right. There you go.
Yeah. So he came in and he started working with us and started doing the numbers. And I remember the next board meeting, he said, you're not going to believe this. And I said, what's that? And he showed us the numbers and he said, well, for 2017, you lost roughly $2.56 million as an organization. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And he said, yes. And I had no idea. I didn't have experience in working in organizations that, were not financially stable. And I certainly didn't run my household budget in the red. I really was very conservative when it came to financials. And so I looked at the founder and he kind of smiled and he's like, well, and based on those numbers, I think we're going to go broke in about 40 years. And I thought, what in the world kind of response is that? What kind of mentality is that? Hold on a second. And so the CFO was more in line with me, being an older guy and being conservative. We were just like, this is crazy. We got to figure this out. To be honest with you, we just sat back and said, okay, let's start with people. And we did a survey of our people. Collectively, we had about 13 people that were, I'd say, vice president or above. And I literally had a whiteboard and I put a bus up there because the main revenue source of the company over the years was transportation. So we put a bus up with 12 seats on it, just like you'd see an old small school bus. And then in the driver's seat, we had it vacant. So we asked people, all right, put yourself, here's a role, here's a responsibility task. What do you do? How do you do it? And so from a visual standpoint, it was, okay, let's put the first one up. And so the first sticky note would go into the driver's seat of the bus. And so the driver, we had an honorary title. It was the founder, if you will. So the guy who really built the legacy company. So it was the founder of the company. Then the president, right behind the founder, first seat on the bus. And then we kind of went back through there and everybody had it. So we started talking about that, about the people, strengths and weaknesses, where we're going, where we came from, what the goals are. And next thing you know, out of 13 seats, we probably went through a series of about, I'd say maybe 3-4 meetings. We were probably in the second or third quarter. We ended up with 8 people in different seats. And some of the 8 people were new people. Some of them were just people that were in the wrong seat based on their strengths. And so our entire leadership team went from, 13 people in a different seat to 8 people in a new seat, new titles. And one of the tools that we utilized and implemented was we said, okay, we need to do profiling. And so I don't know if you're a believer in profiling or not, but it seems like it's not an easy button, but it'll answer some questions about why people respond. Like you have a stimulus, like here's what the stimulus is. What's your response to the stimulus? Well, it kind of tells you if then. So if this happens, this is what you can expect. It's kind of how people are hardwired. And so once we did that psychological profiling, we figured out that this psychological profile is going to ensure failure. And that's not what we want. And so we thought, okay, how can we ensure success? So we did a deeper dive. We went, and it's called Culture Value Index. And so we went back down through there and we said, okay, let's set the Culture Value Index. Let's set the job descriptions based on the need of the mission. And then let's find the person that's wired that way. And so through that, it changed it. So we literally thought, okay, we got this all set up in 2018, 2019. I was in the organization now for a couple years, and all of a sudden this global pandemic breaks out. So we're like, well, how are we going to continue implementing where we're going on this 3-year plan? My contract was going to be up in 2020. And so I didn't want to necessarily leave the organization and transition, but my goal was to go out and do my own organization, my own company with my wife. That was our dream. And so the founder came back in, the son came back in and said, how can we ensure a transition plan? And so we went back to the table and we started talking about that. Next thing you know, I was the CEO. So we came through that thing saying, okay, Ron, would you step up as the CEO? Because we want to go, and we want to grow. And there's so many companies in our industry that are failing because of COVID. So how can we take advantage? We were doing a good job of getting the right person in the right seat, in the right bus. And then ironically, now we thought, oh gosh, for whatever reason, it's the right time because of COVID. And we had done such a good job of fixing our financials, fixing our budgets, putting the right person in the right seat for growth. So I accepted that challenge. And the son became president, just president. I became the CEO. He reorganized my seat to now be in charge of business development, professional development, and training. And so those were two areas that we needed to focus on. When I got there in 2017, I told you we were losing, $2.5 million a year. We had 560 employees. Was that the right number of employees? Don't know. Did we have the right list of clients? Obviously we didn't. And so putting that together, working the plan, reorganizing, and we ended up in 2021, Jeff, you know how the story ends, but we ended up doing $1 million a day in business. And
wow.
We ended up going up the charts, if you will. You and I, we talk football. We ended up, we were consistently in the top 10 in every category. And in a parallel, universe to sports and football and that, we were fighting for championships every year now. And all of a sudden, private equity shows up and the bank shows up and says, you're doing mergers, acquisitions, you're buying companies, you're growing into our areas, our verticals. There's a lot of overlap. And we would be interested in a partnership. Well, with private equity, most times the partnership's 100%. They'll come in and give you capital in some situations, but most situations 100%. And so we ended up, the family had made a decision and they ended up selling our two largest companies. One of the things I failed to mention is that 564 employee number went up to almost right around 3,000 employees.
Wow.
So we grew our organization extremely fast. We grew, we took advantage of being prepared with a foundation in 18 and 19 that set us up for COVID. We didn't predict COVID, but our mindset was we've got to get better. We want to be the best. We've got the right people. COVID presented the right time for us. And the founder of the company had done a good job of preserving and protecting, I think, his legacy. And so just having his experience, too, to bounce things off of as a board member was instrumental. And when you're doing $1 million a day in business, things are moving pretty fast.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts. He creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
When you're doing $1 million a day in business, things are moving pretty fast.
Yeah. Especially starting from a loss of, 2.57 million for the year.
Yeah.
When you started. So, there's so many different things. I'd love to chat about there with that story. I mean, like, why was it? Did you use Culture Index in a previous job? Why did you, but why did you pick it for the assessment for the kind of rebirth of the company?
Yes, we did. And my experience back in '97, that's one of those experiences in the book that we didn't get into, but I was diagnosed with terminal illness. So I'm sitting at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and they're estimating the time expectancy for me to be alive. And I went on a faith journey, and my journey was, hey, if you spare my life, I will have a positive impact in all those people that I have the opportunity to touch. And so I was spared, and I wasn't supposed to be here. And when I came out on the other side after 3 medical procedures and a life-saving basically system that they had created for me to spare me and to save my life, I made a pact with God. I don't want to go too deep into faith, but I made a pact with God. I said, if you save my life, I will take care of others. And so I got back and I went in, and I ended up meeting a gentleman who changed my life forever, Stephen Covey. So Dr. Covey and I had several conversations. I ended up going to the Covey Institute in Salt Lake City. And I ended up being, basically, I was a trainer and a coach and a facilitator for 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And in there, my mindset went straight into what matters most. First things first, begin with your end in mind, because it was my end. And so if I had that mindset and how I can help and impact others, so people. And Covey always taught me, if you focus on the people, the numbers will take care of themselves. And so that mindset I'd taken with me at each organization and into the family-owned business. And part of that people was you got to know who you're working with and how they're hardwired. So we did everything from DISC. So there's other tools out there that really will allow you to find out more in depth about your people. CVI, I did some research on CVI, and one of the CVI indicators for me was it has operational excellence built in as a key component. So if I have the right person and the right aptitude with the right attitude, I know we can be successful. And so I took the CVI myself, and I took it and I brought it back to my family, and I said, is this a good indicator? Are these results accurate? Be honest with me. And they aligned with my personality and how I was wired. And so I took that information, I went to EOS, and then I became an EOS implementer. And so I brought EOS back to our organizations. And so I thought, okay, we're perfectly aligned now. We have the right people, the right seat, right bus, right time. And since it is the right time, we better be measuring the right things. And EOS, that's the one thing that they do right. It's operational excellence. So once you determine the right person, and the nice thing about the blend with Stephen Covey and EOS for me was rocks. They keep talking about rocks. What are your rocks? What are your rocks? Years ago when I was a young manager, I thought, well, what's a rock? Obviously it's a physical object, but in my brain now, it's what matters most. A rock can be something that blocks a pathway that you got to remove, or a rock could be something you're never going to move. It's your path. That's where you're going. That's it. So these big rocks matter most in your life. And how are you going to use them? As obstacles, or that's my target? And that's where I'm going to get to. It's a mountain. That's a rock. It's a mountain. I want to be on top. Covey told me one day, be careful. He said, Ron, can you imagine going up that ladder of success one rung at a time? And you've worked your tail off. You've expended all your time, which is very, very, very important, because that's all you have. And then all your money, all your capital, you get up to the roof and you're like, holy cow, I'm here. I get up there, I get over the top. And he goes, then you go, damn, I'm on the wrong roof. And he said, spend that time to do the maintenance, look around, ensure you're on the right pathway, my friend. And so that was it. I mean, that's a long answer for a question, but CVI and Culture Index was brought in. Yeah. It was my bridge from Dr. Covey to EOS.
Having read your book Unbroken, I was going to bring up Covey because I never met Dr. Covey personally, but he had a big influence in my life. I was at Sprint at the time, and they had the University of Excellence, which was a great learning and development initiative where we got all types of training. So we had a 5-day 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, full day, maybe, Friday was a half day, I don't know. But it really changed how I approach life. Think with the end in mind, pretend it's your 80th birthday party. What do you want all the people that are going to be there to say about you? So it really changed my mindset. I was probably around the same age that kind of where you found Covey. But I'm just so interested in a couple things. I mean, what was it like just being a facilitator, and what did you learn from that experience? And were you doing it full time or as like a part-time gig? Because obviously you might have had other things going on.
I actually was doing that. It's a great point. My wife, I'm glad she's not here because she would probably put a boot in my butt. But I did that. I had to take time off of my organization. Then I had a full-time job, and then back in the day, the system was you could be on a speakers bureau. So you'd have a bio and people could click, hey,
Right.
I'm most aligned with Ron, and Ron would be great to come in and work with my team. And so it wasn't guaranteed. I wasn't one of those experienced, been there, tenured person who had been there like Dr. Covey and being a professor. And so my experience with smaller organizations based on, the things you and I have already discussed, I had a lot of not-for-profit. So the small municipalities, county, state, federal governments, the K-12 private schools. And so I would do a lot of team work with them, team building with them. And so, no, it wasn't, hey, I'm doing this full time, 40 hours a week. Somebody would click on a box and I would go. Some of the organizations toward the end, I had the opportunity to work with Disney Institute. I did a workshop with the Disney Institute down in Orlando. I did one up in New Orleans. And so I had an opportunity to work with some of the larger teams. And I will tell you, the things that I've learned, I always walked out of a workshop, and you had the opportunity to schedule. It was a menu of options. I could do online. I could do an hour, 2 hours, up to 4 days, like the one you had mentioned. And then there was some reoccurring follow-up that had to take place with some of the organizations. And probably some of the best learning for me was actually when I got to work with some of the people in the schools, because that mindset of these parents who are also the teachers, who are also influencing young minds in the developmental cycle about, things that matter most. You and I, it might be, P&L, balance sheet, asset controls, but for them, it might be relationships and people and family. And so that really drove home with me is the fact that we could overlap that. And then when the Covey Institute started working with K-12 and they developed a program, The Leader in Me, and they worked with a group of principals. So it wasn't just enterprise work and for-profit organizations. It really transcended into, I can help not-for-profit. I can help people in education. I can help those who influence children and their families and create a better culture and environment for them to grow in. That was emotional for me. I think it was impactful for me. So that may not be the direction you thought I was going to go, but it was like, gosh, yeah. This is important and it matters.
Yeah. Now, I was a big Covey fan. I even took my team when I was at Sprint PCS. We went to Chicago to take the principal-centered leadership course. So that helped us. It reminds me of a story. I don't know if you've heard this one. You're talking about big rocks. So I don't know if it was a famous college professor, but early in my leadership career, after doing the Covey courses, I heard this story about, this college professor is in front of his class and he has this big fishbowl and he's saying, we're going to take I want you to observe, and he's putting big rocks in the fishbowl, and he goes, is the fishbowl full? And he goes, and they go, no. They go, yeah, it's full. And he goes, then he starts putting smaller rocks in there. Is it full now? Yes. And then even smaller rocks, and then a bunch of sand, and each time he's going, is it full? And then after the sand, it's totally covered. And he goes, is it full now? They go, yes, it's finally full. And he opens up 2 beers, pours them in there. He goes, just remember, no matter how packed life is, there's always room for a couple of beers.
I remember. Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know if that was a Covey thing. I just remember that story. It's
actually, I think it was done by a gentleman who was at a facility, and that was his team. And he was basically a licensed facilitator, and he was in like EOS has in-house integrators now where you kind of grow your own. And I remember I heard about it, and then somebody, I think it's on YouTube now, somebody was saying, you got to see this. And it's a mindset. It is a mindset. Yeah. It's like, no. There's always, no. And the thing about the gravel, the sand, and all that other stuff was, that's fine. And okay, so what? It doesn't fit. Covey will tell you, hey, you know what the gravel is? What? It's mass media. It's marketing. What do you mean? It's the stuff that if you get to it, great. If you don't today,
Yeah.
great. But the big rocks are always going to be there first, and they're always taken care of, and that's what matters
Right.
most.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
first rock.
First things first,
Yeah,
right?
the first rock's probably your family.
Right.
And then you and we talked about this today. What's that? Well, work-life balance.
Yeah.
How many of us old executives look back and, we're going, gosh, I don't think you could ever get anyone saying, man, I regret the amount of time I spent with my family. Whew.
Right. Right.
Nobody does that.
Yeah. Yeah. Ron, I'm curious. So, you were so successful in the public sector, and we didn't even talk about your youth sports, and, coaching at different levels. And I love the story too in the book that, because I did the same thing. I played, just, I'll say kind of the main sports, that I knew growing up from a blue collar, family and, son of immigrant parents, like it was just football, basketball, baseball in that order. The only time I ever played soccer is, a couple times in gym class, I guess. I don't know. My sophomore year in high school, that was the first year they had soccer. So they didn't even have soccer until then. But anyhow, and I coached my son in soccer starting at like fourth grade. I mean, when he was 4 and through, I don't know, seventh grade or whatever it was. And I had no idea. I like you, read books and all that. But talk about, like, it had to be different from the public sector in some ways to go to Kincaid in the private sector. And so talk about the biggest differences for you and maybe the biggest, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen type thing.
I think the biggest change for me was the fact that when I was in the public eye, my wife would always say, you can't even go to a restaurant. So going to a restaurant for us was an experience because I would go out, and of course, in a growing community like this, I literally had probably 80 to 90,000 bosses. And so they would always come up and sit down. And I wasn't mature enough as a person to say that this is family time, which I probably should have. And can you allow me to spend time with my children and my wife? And I just want to have some personal time with my family. And so being in that public eye, it's very demanding. And expectations are through the roof. And I get it. Everyone pays your salary. I mean, they'll remind you of that every day of the week. And so I was struggling in the balance of saying, excuse me, I'm with my family, to hold on family, and let me hear their concern, whether it's that airport or that new highway, or, hey, it might even be, why is the landfill growing? It's just crazy stuff. Well, when I went to the private enterprise side, I really felt responsible for about 3,000 of our people, which was our employees. And so it was more focused on employees, the family-owned operation and company, and then really our clients. And so for me, I was able to just really narrow it down and get laser focused on a smaller segment, smaller group, smaller that. And I didn't feel like, I didn't personally have the issue of saying, hey, not today, not now, not when I'm with my family, and just separating the two. And so that's different. I think being in the public side, I know they get a lot of scrutiny, and because, well, they should, you're paying a lot of money in taxes and everything else, but that's a tough gig. So having so many people that's taking your time, energy, and your effort, that was hard. So I have a lot of respect for people who do that and in service, whether it's, the local municipality all the way up to the men and women who give their life in our military. A lot of respect. It's a tough job. Enterprise side, yeah, you're responsible for those employees and their families. And so I think that was the two biggest things for me. At the end of the day, like you said, being in sports and athletics, you're competitive. So I think as we get older too, that competitive spirit, and that doesn't leave us. We want to win. And however you define that win is, you solve a problem for a key client. You help an employee get that degree he or she's been trying to get. You put together a benefit program that might give somebody a better quality of life and a healthcare program. So you do your homework, you grow the company, you partner with the right people, you put your employees in a position to be successful, and whatever their big rocks are. I guarantee you that probably the first rock in their fish tank is going to be family too. So creating an environment that they can have healthcare coverage, creating an environment where they can have vacation, sick leave, creating an environment where you have a culture that supports each other and allows you to grow. We grew so fast in that culture. One of the things I forgot to tell you when I got to the family business, looking back 3 years, looking forward 3 years, we did a study. We had a 39% retention in 2016 and 17 of key full-time employees. Looking back in 2021, we had a 93% retention of key employees. So you've been in business, you understand what the cost of replacement is, the learning curve, the relationship, equity you have with a client, losing a client because of a key staff member. And so that retention saved us so much money and a lot of our clients. That's important, I think.
You work with a lot of iconic business figures, but I'm curious about two, Lamar Hunt and T. Boone Pickens. And with T. Boone Pickens, I'm just curious, you being a staunch OU supporter, what was it like working with a big OSU guy?
Oh, man. He's a character. T. Boone was amazing. So let's go Lamar Hunt. They're complete opposites, first of all.
Right.
Back to that deal you were talking about soccer. We were growing a soccer organization in our community. Again, fastest growing community, youth programs growing. Somehow, some way along the way, I volunteered. I began coaching. I was a board member. Then I became the president of the association. We worked with the local city on Parks and Rec side to help grow that program. Well, they didn't have enough money. We couldn't generate enough fees. We didn't want to raise parent fees. So we were looking for community support to help with equipment. We were needing to buy goals, nets, benches, all the stuff to support the program. And I ended up meeting Lamar Hunt through that. And Lamar Hunt was huge into sports, as you know. I mean, he grew probably, the Lamar Hunt Trophy?
Yeah.
Gave him credit for not only taking this two fragmented leagues, but creating a bigger, stronger league together. And so I met with him and asked for help. He met me out at the field. We walked the field together, and the vision was we're going to create fields here through the local Parks and Rec. Can you help me? I need help with some donations to get the equipment. We sat down. He's very humble. Yes, very soft-spoken. I mean, I have a hard time hearing anyway, so I have to lean in. And he said, we'll do what we can. We'll do this. Here's a contact. Here's a name. Here's a number. Let me know what you need. And I trust, and I want to be out here when we cut that ribbon, because he goes, my excitement comes from seeing those kids smiling and hearing that laughter. Very humble. Very humble. So I learned a lot about him, about, hey, it's okay to stay in the shadows and sit back and watch people. But what matters most is the impact you're having on those children. I still get emotional about meeting people like that. And so I took that. I learned a lot from him about being humble, being kind, work in the shadows. It's more fun sitting back watching and putting the kids up front and watching them succeed. And then I was down in Dallas, Texas, and I went down there to T. Boone's office. And it was to have a conversation similar to Lamar in the fact that I was working for the public school district at the time. I was being challenged by the parents, teachers, staff, community to figure out a way back in the housing boom or housing crash. Remember 2008 in Kansas City?
Yeah.
Budgets are getting slashed. How can we figure this out? We can't raise taxes. It's just not a successful environment. So we needed to be creative. Well, very first thing we said was, let's save money. So operational excellence became important. So we adopted a mantra saying saving money is making money. So you don't have to go print new money. Let's figure it out. So one of the things we did was said, okay, let's go for operational excellence. We had school buses. We had 150 school buses. We picked up, thousands of kids. Average school bus was 100 miles a day, to school, back, to school, pick them up, take them back home. Well, if you do the math, I mean, that's roughly 22,000 miles a day. So if it costs, whatever the fuel was at the time, $3.50, $3.60 a gallon, how can we cut that 22,500 miles down in the operational costs? Well, let's look at alternative fuels. Parents, staff, PTA raise their hand. Yeah, let's go green. Put that flag out front of every school saying we're saving the world. Let's do it. So we called around. We figured it out. We said, all right, who has a green initiative? Well, one of the best buses in the world was Thomas Built Bus. They were so much an industry leader. High Point, North Carolina. So we traveled down there and we said, hey, we need to save money. We can't afford diesel anymore. We do about 22,000 miles a day. What does that look like? Can you help us? Yeah, we can help you. Well, then I filled out some grant applications, went in, asked the city, the county, the state, and the feds for some money to go green because there were some alternative fuel monies out there. And sure enough, they stepped up, they helped us. And we said, okay, if the bus costs more because it's brand new, the motor costs more because it's new technology, how are we going to pay for it? Well, the federal government came back and said, we got some grants. So they helped us in that regard. Well, how are we going to build infrastructure? Because now we need fueling stations because all we have right now is gasoline and diesel. Hey, there's this guy, a company called Clean Energy. He's trying to save the world. He's one of these oil tycoon guys, but he's got a lot of natural gas that he's burning off, wasting. He's trying to repurpose it and save the planet too. I got to meet the guy. So I called Thomas Built Bus and I said, hey, if you guys got clean and green motors, I need clean and green fuel. Do you know T-Boone? Yeah, I know T-Boone. I'll introduce you to T-Boone. So I've got on a jet. Me and some people from the district flew down there, sitting in his boardroom, waiting. Unfortunately, he's about an hour late. He came in. Oh, my gosh, he was pissed. I said, what's the problem? He said, here's the deal. I've got this young kid asking me to shoot a commercial for the Big 12 championship football game in Dallas. He goes, he gave me something to read. It's like 4 pages long. I don't have time for that shit. So he goes, I finally told him after, I think he said 12 takes. They had to restart 12 takes. I ain't saying this story again. That ain't my problem. So he was pissed. And he goes, is there any way we can reschedule? And I thought, oh, you got to be kidding me. And he had a staff assistant. So his executive assistant was so nice. She goes, I just got the food ordered in, sir. We decided that we'd bring some food in. And sure enough, I said, can I ask you a question, regardless of how this goes? Sorry about what happened in your morning shot, because we were supposed to meet at 11. Now it's noon. He's probably hungry as well. And so I said, we had a debate. Can you help us? You're an Oklahoma State guy. And he said, yeah. And thank God I didn't wear my Sooner stuff. And the other guy from the district, he's a Mizzou grad. And so can you break this tie for us? Because it means a lot. And he goes, what the hell are you talking about? I said, I'm not going to tell you who I have, and I'm not going to tell you who he has, but we've been debating here for the last hour and we're waiting on you to show up. Who's the greatest running back all time? He said, do what? We said, who's the greatest running back all time at Oklahoma State? Oh, boy. Well, only one of them backed up the other one. I'd have to say, if you're back up to another one, it's because he's a starter. It's because he's better than you. So he said, man, I guess I'll go. And I think her name's Sherry, I can't remember. He was like, can you got those sandwiches? This is going to take a while. And he just relaxed. He sat down. He goes, I'm going to say Thurman. I'm going to guess Thurman. Barry was kind of third backup, man. Let's get Thurman. Thurman's, man, but the guys, dang, they're both good. They're both very good. They're best running backs I've ever seen. And then we went. And then 20, 30 minutes later, food's there. And he goes, why are you here? Are we here to talk about Oklahoma State football, Cowboys? I said, nah. He goes, when are we here? I said, sir, we're trying to do something nobody else has ever done. He said, oh, great. You know how many people tell me that? I said, no, this is a true story. And I said, I got these guys here from the plant. They make this equipment. And you know who they are. They know you. So they are introducing us. But I can't afford to put in a gas station. And I'm going to look like an idiot. Because I can get 150 buses from them that your taxpayers are going to pay for. The government's going to give us a grant to help us offset the cost in equipment. I need help with the fuel. I need help getting natural gas in a fueling system. Can you help me build a fuel station? Well, shoot. He looked at his team. He had a couple members. He goes, what's that going to cost me? And they said, I don't know. It depends on how many units. I said, 150. Well, it depends on, I go, you're the expert. I can't answer any more of those questions. Sir, I think it's going to be about maybe $2.2 million. He said, you want me to give you $2.2 million? I said, $0 to $2.2 million. I'm not greedy. And he goes, well, I'll tell you what. If you can figure out a deal so I can put natural gas in the city to the public and also the school district, because I have this initiative from the federal government too. I have to bring this clean energy highway, natural gas highway across America. I need to put a public station somewhere in and around that. Shook hands, walked out of there, $2 million that day. And we had a curbside, this side fueled. All of the school district's buses, this side of the curb, had a public access. and you could go in there and there was a royalty put on it to get his $2.2 million back on top of the public fuel costs. And it was capped at the $2.2 million with a simple interest of like 5 to 7%. I think he ended up getting his money back in 2 years from the public fueling system.
Fantastic. Love that story. I know you have your own company now, post Kincaid Group, when you exited there after the PE buyout, RC Development Solutions. So talk about that as well as your Cox Family Giving Foundation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The RC Development is really for my wife and I and our family. It's the company we wanted to start back in 2020 when COVID delayed everything, and I ended up staying at the family-owned company. But what we really focus on is connecting people in business development side, and so helping grow our infrastructure, our network of contacts. So for us, we've done a lot of projects in and around Kansas City, working with large corporations, implementing EOS, the Covey, doing leadership development training. And so I go in and work with leadership teams that really want to try to grow and emulate us and what we did at the family company. The other division we have is really strengthened by my wife. My wife she spent 26 years in commercial development. And so one of the things that she's really good at is finding networks and partners and environments that really could help in multifamily. There's an underserved community. So using her network and influence and contacts, we do commercial construction development stuff. So right now we have a multifamily project that we're working on down in Dallas. We have an industrial project. It's a mixed-use development down in Lafayette, Louisiana. Then we have another one out in Centennial, Colorado. And so that division of RC Development is the commercial development side. And then we are fortunate enough to start bringing our kids into the company. So we have 2 adult children. It really started on the commercial development side, but really got into the security access control, video surveillance stuff. And so we'll go in and do assessments with organizations and help them. If there's, a threat assessment, maybe it's even staffing issues. Maybe it's they have an employee that is going to be a high risk termination for whatever reason, access to their data, things that they could sabotage the company. So we use our network and partners to come in and do training on the HR side. They'll help do high risk termination. They'll do threat assessments, access control, like, hey, you probably shouldn't have the public come in this area, or employees should park here, and kind of doing a campus-wide security audit. One of the projects we're working on right now actually is near and dear to my heart as far as soccer goes, but it's we're working with FIFA right now. All the teams, we anticipate 600,000 to 800,000 people coming into Kansas City for the World Cup. And so we're working. We just did an assessment last week. We put together proposals for 8 sites all the way. The most obvious is Arrowhead. You got, all the matches there. But things that people are concerned with is, where are these teams training? And then probably the most concerning thing is because they're going to spend more time on this third layer than anywhere else, and that's where they're staying. So where they're housed, most of their time will be spent there. Where they're training, second most of their time will be there. And then where are they playing? And so we put together an assessment so we can keep eyes on them. And that includes security trailers, drones, everything from, detection systems, monitoring systems, screening systems. We're lucky enough in our partnership, we can go all the way to TSA grade, federal government grade, access control to the airport, down to the gate. Our partnerships include the NHL, MLS, NFL, do a lot of NCAA. And so just working with our 2 kids on that side of it and using their expertise and contacts to solve those problems. That's really the 3 things that RC Development does.
Do you want to talk about your Cox Family Giving Foundation? I know your first book is dedicated to your nephew that served and died in combat. So you want to talk about that?
You told me you were going to make me cry today.
I didn't promise.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough, when I ended up leaving the family business that I had worked in, we set up a DAF. So we have a donor advised fund here in Kansas City. And really, we had 3 missions that came out of that. And that was, help men and women in service, help faith-based organizations, and help youth organizations. And so that's been our mission. We launched right off the bat with men and women in uniform, and it tied directly into our passion project and our purpose, which was to really honor our nephew Daniel L. Cox. So Daniel was in the 10th Mountain, and he was serving our country in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. He was on a second deployment, and unfortunately, he was killed by a remote detonated roadside bomb. And so Daniel's legacy lives on today through Cox Family Giving Strategy. We're partnering with his school district, Parsons, Kansas. So Parsons Public Education Foundation, we give all 100% of the proceeds of this book go into that foundation directed toward the the Parsons Education Foundation. And with that, the purpose is we want to help kids, young adults, men and women that want to transition and serve. And so when you graduate and you go to higher ed and you stay engaged in the ROTC program, then you can apply for funding. And that funding would be directed through the board at the Education Foundation to help others. And again, we want to do that because I fully anticipated that when Daniel left high school, Daniel was going to go and play football. He was an athlete, loved sports, just a good kid. And I went to high school graduation in May, and my sister-in-law said, "Hey, Daniel, why don't you tell your uncle about your plans?" And I thought, okay, let's go over and have a drink and sit down. So I can't wait to hear where you're going to play. And he said, "You know what? I've decided I'm going to go in the military." I said, "You're going to do what?" And he said, "Yeah, I've decided I'm going in the military." And I said, "Well, let's talk a little bit about that. What's going on?" He said, 9/11. I said, 9/11? How does that directly impact you? And he said, they brought that fight to us. And he said, they killed us. They killed Americans. They killed men and women. It's just innocent people. And he said, I can't let them get away with that. And so I said, wow, that's a big mission. And he said, yeah, a couple of things that came out of that. And I was like, I can't believe how brave you are. It was an amazing thing for him to say. He went through basic training. He got done. And I remember we celebrated. And I said, so what's going on now? How's this tied to 9/11? And what's your role now? And he said, I'm going to New York. And I said, why are you going to New York? And he said, because the 10th Mountain, he said, they have the highest casualty rate in the war right now. And I said, what now? Hold on a second. So you want to go to an area that automatically is going to be deployed on day one, and you want to go over and you want to do what now? Tell me more. I'm going to go over and I'm going to find bin Laden. And I said, your mission is to find bin Laden? He said, yeah. And he said, I've done the math. I figured it out. I know he's in that Pakistan, Afghanistan region because that's our highest casualty rate. But what else do they have over there in the mountains they're trying to protect? And he said, I'm going to go there and I want to find him. And so he raised his hand and he was sent to 10th Mountain. He went to 10th Mountain. Years later, here we are, where's bin Laden found, but being protected in Pakistan, right? And right. So I'm like, that kid was so smart at 18 years old. He had it figured out and he had a mission. And his purpose was save me and save you and save all of us. So that's what he did. Brave guy.
So sorry for your loss, and it's inspiring what you've turned it into to help others. Ron, there's two groups I love helping. One's at recent college or even high school graduate today that's going to take their next step and go through and start their professional career. What advice would you have for them as they begin that journey?
I will tell you, I've got 2 adult children and we've sit down and had this conversation. So it's personal with me. And I said, don't show up on day one and think you have it all figured out. You got to go in and be open-minded. You got to go in and you got to understand that I'm going to be a lifelong learner. And if you think you've got it all figured out as of right now, then you're sadly mistaken and you've closed up your opportunities. So I would tell young professionals, go in, get involved in the community, and not just in the classroom, but in the community. Get involved in organizations. Both of my boys, I said, sign up for intramurals, meet people, play on a team, have a common goal, learn to work with others, share success. And so I would tell them, hey, you need to do that. Get more involved on campus, off campus, in the communities, find your passion, find your purpose, and then continue to be a lifelong learner. And one of the most important things, and my son and I had this conversation about a month ago, and I told him, I said, listen, if you're the smartest person in each one of the meetings you're at, and you're the smartest person in your friend group in that room, you're in the wrong room. Because it's absolutely exhausting pulling people all the time and motivating people all the time. It's so much better to be inspired, refreshed, and say, I've never seen it that way. I've never done it that way. What a great learning opportunity for me. So if you're the smartest person in your group, you're in the wrong group, man.
I've asked 200 people that question, and I love that. That's a different answer, the last part. So I love that. Ron, the second group is, everybody can be a leader at an organization, but those that want to take the next step from an individual contributor to lead a team for the first time, so you're responsible for a group of people, what advice do you have for them as they begin that leadership journey?
I would say you need to learn to be humble. You need to sit there and understand that God has purposely given you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen to others. If you want to have success, you need to empower people. And the way you empower people is give them a voice. And you have to have them buy in by saying, okay, I want to hear from you. And a lot of times these people that you're hearing from are closest to the action. They do it. You don't. You operate in your office, your boardroom, your jet, your flight, you're meeting clients. So you have to listen to those people and empower them in voice. Once they're vested, they'll create outcomes for you. But also listen to the clients. So understand, if you want to retain a client, you empower a client to be part of the process and part of that decision making. Well, that's what I would tell them, is sit back, listen, use those 2 ears and that 1 mouth, and use that as your ratio.
So appreciate you coming on the Corporate Couch. I'm inspired by you and your life and what you've overcome and where you are today. We didn't talk about so many other things. I'll have to have you on again, but your book about your life is Unbroken, and the book that your first book, Me and My Best Friend, that's where all the proceeds go to the Daniel L. Cox Memorial Scholarship Fund. So for you listeners out there, they're both great books. So thanks again, Ron, for coming on.
Thank you, Jeff.
I don't know where to start on Ron. I'm going to start with the more less uplifting things in his life, but the guy is an inspiration. I met him over beers with a couple of my friends, one that Jerry Kaufman, ex-Sprint colleague of ours, and his friend Brett Fuller, and Brett knew Ron. The four of us had a happy hour together. And I read his book. It's called Unbroken. One of his books, his latest one, Unbroken: From Bully to Boardroom. And I read the whole thing cover to cover before we talked. And just the guy has an amazing life. I mean, just crazy stuff. Abused by a stepfather, physically, contemplated and tried to kill himself at 17. Illnesses. They thought he had pancreatic cancer, and he's just a very humble. And what a wealth of accomplishments. He took the Kincaid group from a 256 million annual loss to making almost $1 million a day in 5 years. Amazing? And you and I are big Stephen Covey fans. He had the whole Stephen Covey. He was a facilitator for 7 years, and we love Covey. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the major influence of my life for sure. And just the iconic stories with Covey and the Lamar Hunt, the founder of the AFL and the Kansas City Chiefs, and the MSL, Major League Soccer, and then T. Boone Pickens, and it had some funny moments too. When he met his now wife of 36 plus years in college, and I think he was maybe a sophomore. I don't know exactly when. He went to the farm that her hometown, and went out with his dad to the farm to help him and asked for her hand in marriage. And the guy goes, "This is your father-in-law. You might be the dumbest son of a bitch I've ever met." And he followed that up with, "It doesn't matter what I say. My daughter's going to do whatever she wants."
She's going to do what she wants. She's
a lesson there too. But just his focus on family. All he did in youth sports. He coached. He started the Lee Summit, a major suburb in Kansas City. The youth soccer program. Mm-hmm. He was just working with so many great people, and his stories and his success and what he's doing now, and investing in companies and helping leaders be better leaders. I don't know. It was he's a fun guy for sure, and what he's gone through, and in his life. You know, everybody thinks they've had a hard life till you meet somebody like Ron Cox, and then you go, wow, you know, that's a hard life. So, Joe, what was your take on it?
No kidding. If you remember when I wasn't there when you recorded the interview with him, so I listened to it later. And I listened to the first 10 minutes of it or so, and I kept thinking to myself, is there going to be a redemption? You know,
right. You were like, I don't know if I want to listen to the rest. It's depressing.
This is a depressing interview. And of course, man, was there a redemption. I mean, literally just a minute or two after that, it came out. And he has had such a varied and interesting career in his life, both in the public sector and in private business, and in his life and his personal life and his sporting life and everything. There's just been everything. Of course, you know that I lived in Lee Summit, suburb that he was talking about. I lived there for 13 years, and so it's very dear to my heart. And I lived just down the street from the school, the Lee Summit West High School, that he talked about building while he was there. And one of the projects that he worked on there was they replaced every school bus with liquefied natural gas instead of diesel, but he had to have a source for it. So he flies to Oklahoma to meet T. Boone Pickens, and that story was just hilarious.
T. Boone Pickens was pissed coming into the meeting.
He was mad coming into it. And what's this meeting about? What's going to happen here? And then he comes away with a multi-million-dollar contract.
2.2 billion.
2.2 billion.
Yeah, for the natural gas fueling station that they needed because they got the buses already.
Got buses.
It's a minor detail.
How we going to... Well, I can't put diesel in them, so I guess I'm going to have to figure out some way of doing that. Then that opened up a whole new business for Pickens at the same time. It was just a very interesting interview.
And I forget the math of that, but, you know, like think about, you know, like he went through the math of, you know, diesel fuel buses, you know, X number of buses, you know, this many miles per bus, and the cost of the diesel. And I forget the cost savings, but it was just phenomenal what he said to the district.
It's kind of like, so why aren't we all driving natural gas cars? I mean, what's the... Because I've seen those in UPS trucks before, and I've seen them in mail delivery vehicles stuff. So, and now in school buses. So maybe that's a thing. I don't know. It was an amazing interview. I really enjoyed it.
Joe, we're recording here in April. What's your kind of spring fling? What are you doing?
You know, I recently retired, but I've still been looking for other things that I might want to do. And I've thought about being a proofreader for a newspaper.
Yeah, sure.
Being a proofreader is literally in my blood, literally, because I'm typo negative.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.